If we start with the assets, it's important to recognize that there are three different kinds of assets that the government uses to produce social outcomes. The obvious one, of course, is money. But in the case of the government, it's important to remember that an awful lot of the money comes from tax dollars, so that what we're spending is essentially dollars that the government raised through the power of taxation. There's a second important asset that is suggested by my discussion of the first, which is that nearly always when we're doing public sector work, the authority of the state is importantly engaged. And we often don't think of that as an asset, but it turns out that it's a pretty important one. It can be materially useful in producing changes in the world. It has a cost because every time we use the authority of the state, we're restricting in some important sense people's liberty to pursue their lives as they would like to do it rather than as the body politic acting through the state would have them behave. And there's also a direct cost of enforcement activities as well. So you have to think about authority as a potentially valuable asset that gets used and has a cost, as well as essentially the money. And it's important, that's particularly important because we wouldn't have any money if we weren't using the authority of the state as well, because most of it's raised by tax dollars. So you could think that the singular and most important asset of the state is its use of authority. Because we're using authority and because we're using money, what often comes into play then is a very different criteria for evaluating whether we get desirable operational results or not. And the language of efficiency and effectiveness, which is largely a utilitarian language about value for money, all right, yields to some degree to the idea that, well, yes, but we're also using the authority of the state, and that requires us to be able to demonstrate that we are acting fairly with respect to individuals, all right, and the purposes that we're trying to pursue are consistent with an idea of justice as well as with an idea of efficiency and effectiveness. So what gets brought into the world simply because we're using this asset is a reinforcement for the idea that when we're thinking about public value, we have to have in the back of our mind concerns about justice and fairness as well as about efficiency and effectiveness. There's a third, even more obscure asset that I think turns out to be very important in public sector management, which I'm going to call public spirit. And public spirit refers to the willingness of individuals to contribute to public purposes based on their own desire to make changes in the conditions in the world on their own, but also in terms of their willingness to go along with the collective decision that the government made that we would go after this particular problem in this particular way, and that that would require the following things from you as a citizen. And as I say, in the public sector, we often get an unexpected benefit from people voluntarily going along and choosing to do the things that we say is important to do, and we encourage that with nudges of various kinds. But it also helps to soften the blow when it is that we use the authority of the state in some particular way.